In another moment, down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she was to get out again.
To my brother Riley for getting his pilot's license. Where the hell is that motherfucker?
To my father's black card, to my black card.
God, I haven't done Sambuca since I was 20 years old. Yeah! I'm the king of the world!
People think you're crazy, huh? Jumping out of airplanes, flying like birds. That is crazy.
Far Cry 5 is looming on the horizon, at least as I write this. It may even be out now, but that's not really relevant to this video. The fanbase of Far Cry has been torn for a good few years now, but one thing I think most people can agree on is that Far Cry 3 was a fantastic game. From its gameplay to its story and characters, Far Cry 3 nailed the formula. In this video, I want to go over why I think Far Cry 3 was great. I'll go into various reasons why and how this affected the Far Cry franchise ever since. So without further ado, let's dive into Far Cry 3. From the first Far Cry game, they clearly had a direction they wanted to go in. Far Cry 1, by the way, was made by Crytek, not by Ubisoft. They acquired the rights in 2005 and took it in their own direction with Far Cry 2 and beyond, but it still felt true to Far Cry itself. Stranded somewhere which is far from home, assuming you live in the US or somewhere with civilization, because if not, then the title of the game might not apply to you. Anyways, this was what Far Cry was. Stranded, having to survive, not just against the wild, but against enemy factions, animals, and there was a whole story happening at the same time too. Far Cry 2 adapted this and evolved it to something new and refined, if getting malaria every 300 seconds was more refined. Anyways, onto Far Cry 3, this is the point where they took their loose formula and doubled down. This is what we want Far Cry to be, and this is where we're taking it. They were confident, no more pussyfooting around. Far Cry had now established its identity. They used Far Cry 3 to refine its gameplay, story, open world, and make something truly memorable that we'd all remember for years. By making Far Cry 3 an evolved version of the franchise we'd come to know, whilst combining it with common Ubisoft features, hunting, viewpoints, and its famous open world structure, it made Far Cry 3 one of Ubisoft's biggest hits, and for good reason. There is so much to do in the open world, and exploring it is part of the fun. You can hunt animals to craft, you can engage in side missions for the local rebels, and navigating the world is done with tons of different vehicles, along with hang gliders, which is a ton of fun, and this was met with an incredible response in 2012 when the game was released, and all of this feels it's advancing the main story at the same time. This way you don't feel you're taking unnecessary detours, you feel everything in the world is important to you taking down the big bad guys and making your escape off the island. This is something that many games today cannot achieve, and for this, Far Cry 3 should really be proud of the identity that they've worked hard to create for themselves with Far Cry 3.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is...
I suppose I can't make a video on Far Cry 3 without mentioning Vaas, and I wouldn't want to skip on him either. Certainly one of my favourite parts of the game is the character of Vaas, and as good as the game is, I don't think it would have done quite as well if it wasn't for Vaas. I believe Vaas truly is what made a name for Far Cry with Far Cry 3. Sure, before Far Cry 3 it had a nice following, but Far Cry 3 really broke it into the mainstream properly and cultivated a strong and large fan base. I think a lot of this success needs to be attributed to the brilliant writers who crafted the story and this iconic villain. Every time he was on screen, you were on the edge of your seat. You knew this was going to be a great one. It's writing and acting like this that you don't find in many stories, and you certainly don't find it in many video games. Off the top of my head, I can think of a few characters who make me feel the same way. One of them is the Joker, whether it's Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight or Mark Hamill in the Arkham games. Everyone loves seeing the Joker on screen. Another for me would honestly be Bayek of Siwa from Assassin's Creed Origins. From the first cutscene, I knew we had an actor who, with good material, would deliver on some fantastic scenes which felt intense and emotional. Vaas in Far Cry 3 did the same. Michael Mando is a superb actor who delivered the writing perfectly. Vaas was believable, one of the most believable characters in gaming, and I think that in turn not just sells him as a character, but sells this entire game world. You feel it's real because Vaas makes it feel real. You always feel there is a threat around every corner. You don't know exactly what to expect because there's a loose cannon running this island. What turn is the story going to take? What is the world going to throw at you next? You never quite know, and this makes the story flow better. The gameplay flow better, and the exploration flow better. It's not just Vaas who's memorable though. Sure, he's by far the best character in the game, but I feel every main character feels memorable, even Jason the protagonist. In most first-person shooter games, especially ones where you rarely see your main character at all, it can feel hard to relate to them or be invested in their story because you feel they're merely a faceless character to travel this world. With Jason, however, you care for him, his story, for his friends. His drive becomes your drive because as much as you admire Vaas as a character, you've seen what he can do to your friends and your family firsthand. You want to kill this guy, and that comes from the great writing of the main character himself. It can be very hard in games, movies, and TV to write a great villain who you love but also hate too. Vaas is one of these villains. You love to see him on screen, but you hate him because he's truly evil, and this is what gives you the drive to push through the game and this harsh world to exact your revenge. Vaas isn't just a great character with a great performance and great writing. He's a tool which boosts the already great game into an even higher place of immersive storytelling, which bleeds into the open world rather than feeling isolated to story missions and cutscenes, and this is something I admire about the writing of Far Cry 3. Vaas is unique, iconic, and absolutely terrifying. There's a reason people have been torn in the Far Cry community over the past few years. It's mainly over the fact that each Far Cry game for the last 6 years has been for the most part identical, and Far Cry 5 doesn't look to be breaking from that. The formula that worked so well in Far Cry 3 continues to prevail in 2018, and why is that? Aside from the obvious reason that Ubisoft is allergic to innovation, it's probably because the formula they have just works. Why should they change it? Far Cry 3 established the identity of Far Cry. It also built a gameplay system which worked tremendously well and would carry over into Far Cry 4, 5, and even Primal to an extent. They all feel like the same game, but I'm in the camp that they feel too similar. Far Cry 4 and Primal felt more like DLC for 3 with a slight new lick of paint than they did their own games, which is not really what you want from sequels, especially when it's been so many years since the last entry. The fact that I can look at Far Cry 5 and say, yep, that's definitely the exact same Far Cry isn't necessarily a good thing. Who knows, Far Cry 5 might be different enough to pull me in when the time comes, but from the looks of it, it's going down the same route as Far Cry 4 and Primal, simply piggybacking off the success of Far Cry 3. But getting back to Far Cry 3, this is clearly part of its success, part of its legacy. Whether it's because Ubisoft can't outdo Far Cry 3 or because they don't want to risk trying, the fact remains that Far Cry 3 is the pinnacle of a Far Cry game and created the perfect Far Cry formula. There's a reason people look at Far Cry 4, Primal, and 5 and say, that's just Far Cry 3. It's because Far Cry 3 is memorable, and Ubisoft know that. They know how good that game was and still is, and they're trying their best to deviate as little as they can from the formula that they know was hugely successful. They just add more and more things. A wingsuit, planes, helicopters, monster trucks, but at its core, it's the same fun and intuitive system that we loved in Far Cry 3. The stealth worked great, it was simple but fun as hell, the gunplay feels heavy and rewarding with each weapon having its own unique feel, the vehicles felt different and the handling was great, especially for a game that wasn't a driving game. The side objectives were varied and fun, from hunting to bounty missions to side quests for interesting characters. There was so much to do and so much to explore. Far Cry 3 perfected what it was to be a Far Cry game. In the narrative, in the gameplay, in the world, and in the structure, and Ubisoft are terrified to try anything different because they know it'll be a struggle to outdo the greatness they created with Far Cry 3. To conclude, I feel that Far Cry 3 is a great game for many reasons, and I will always remember it fondly. But in order for Far Cry to truly succeed once again, it really needs to let go of Far Cry 3 and look at new horizons in order to take Far Cry to new heights and make a new pinnacle which will shape the franchise for years to come. I do think they can do it. I have faith. I don't know if it'll be with Far Cry 5 or with a future title, but I'm highly optimistic, and I want nothing more than to be invested in a Far Cry game with a story that takes itself seriously, has interesting characters with realistic motivations, a protagonist who I really care for, and a world which is bursting with things to do, see, and experience. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know down below what's your favorite Far Cry game. Different people say different things, but I reckon the general consensus is Far Cry 3. Let me know future topics you'd like for essays in the comments, or tweet me at LazerzHD, link in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos, and maybe head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/asalways, top link in the description, to support me further. Cheers, and I'll see you all next time.